Hello, dear friends. Shavua Tov. Hope this is a good week. And I'd like to talk about Parshat Hukat. And this is Bamidbar, chapter 19 in the book of Numbers, where it says in the second verse, Zot Hukat HaTorah. This is the law of the Torah. Now, in Hebrew, we have two words which are quite prominent, and this is the way it's understood in our literature, in our commentaries. There's a difference between the word chok and mishpat. And the way the commandments of the Torah are understood is that there are two types of commandments. And I call these two types of commandments self-evident and non-self-evident. Mishpatim are self-evident commandments: not to steal, not to murder, not to lie, not to cheat, which we find both in the Ten Commandments and in Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 19. So these are considered self-evident. Yes, you could say it's self-evident, but a lot of people seem to deny its existence anyhow, and they do it anyhow. Yes, but they know that it's wrong, but they're just voluntarily deciding to break those things. But what we call self-evident, I guess many people would call natural morality. And these are the mishpatim. These are the mishpatim. Then we have also what's called chukim, which means precepts that are not self-evident. Keeping kosher and keeping Shabbat and keeping Passover, and not to mix wool and linen in your garments and other things too, and putting on tefillin, etc. And a lot of people will say that, well, I can come up with some reasons why the Sabbath is a good idea of having a day of rest, or why the 39 categories. Or somebody will say, well, the kosher, a lot of people like keeping kosher, they think there are health benefits, etc. Maybe. But these are not self-evident things. It's not that somebody gets up in the morning and says, okay, I think pork is a bad idea. But so I call these laws, we call these laws in general, chukim, the ones that are not self-evident. Now, what we will see also from this week's Parsha, especially according to the Midrash Tanchuma, that the way I just described it is a preferable way. Sometimes I bump into people and they talk about, or I hear people say there are two types of commandments: the ones that have reasons and the ones that don't. But we'll notice in a moment, this is not the way the Midrash Tanchuma explains it. Explains it exactly the way I said. There's a self-evident and non-self-evident. First, the Tanchuma, surprisingly, claims, or maybe not surprisingly, that what's mentioned in our week's parasha, the ceremony of the red heifer, the parah adumah, is the ultimate mitzvah, which is a very hard nut to crack, to understand what it actually means. And why is it that you have to take a cow, a red cow at the age of 2, and you have to slaughter it and then make it and burn it into ashes, and these ashes are sprinkled on an impure person and then become pure? And to make it even more paradoxical, the person who sprinkles the ashes on the impure person to make them pure, he himself becomes impure and has to go to a natural body of water, a mikveh, to become pure again. So what exactly is happening here? And the Tanchuma, the Midrash Tanchuma, gives 4 examples of paradoxical chukim. Example number 1, well, I guess we gave example number 1, is the paraduma, that the person who is sprinkling the ashes is rendering this person pure, but he himself becomes impure and has to go to the mikveh, to the natural body of water. But then you have others too. And the other examples given is that, for instance, yibum, the levirate marriage. According to the Torah, a person cannot marry their brother's wife, whether she is a divorcee or she is a widow. However, if the brother dies without children, it's actually a mitzvah for this brother to marry his brother's widow and have a child in the name of the brother. If he doesn't want, he can do chalitza, which is a special ceremony, but what was prohibited becomes a mitzvah. There's a prohibition in the Torah, another chok, which is called mixing linen and flax. It's called linen and wool. It's called shatnez. And you're not supposed to wear a garment which has linen and wool mixed together. However, there's an exception. If you have a talit, and the talit is made out of linen, but the tzitzit is made out of wool, that's okay. And they learn that from the juxtapositioning of the two mitzvot in the Torah. Another paradox. And the final paradox that of the four that is brought in the Tanchuma, the man who takes the scapegoat out to the desert on Yom Kippur, on the day of the holiest day in the Jewish year, if you want to put it that way, Yom Kippur, the day that we get forgiveness of sins. So this man brings the scapegoat out to the desert, as if in a ceremony you throw away the sins of the people of Israel. But this man himself has to wash his clothing, etc., because of impurity that he contracted. So the Tanchuma says, so what is it? What is it then about these chukim that are so hard to understand and seem contradictory? Then Tanchuma says that Solomon, King Solomon, Shlomo, based on the verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that says, Amarti echkama, I said I will become wise, aval v'hiru chokami mani, but this transcends me. What was Shlomo talking about? Solomon was talking about paraduma, the red heifer. Midrash says that Solomon understood all of the mitzvot of the Torah, whether the self-evident or the non-self-evident, but this one nut he couldn't crack. What is this paraduma? What is this red heifer, and what does it mean? And then Tanchuma also goes on to say that Moses, who reached the highest level of prophecy, God told him the secret of the red heifer. He was told the secret of the meaning of even this one that Shlomo Melech could not crack. Now, Shlomo was the wisest of men, but Moses was the highest of prophets. And he received this special understanding of the paraduma. And one last thing from the Tanchuma. The Midrash Tanchuma says, in Midrash 5 of this week's parasha, Rabbi Chanin Bar Pazi says, there are 7 times the word para, which is a heifer, 7 times a kohen, including Aaron of the first, 7 times about sprinkling the blood, and 7 times they're hoping he brings 7 things in this parasha. And that's his drasha. That's his whole thing. That there are 7 things which come 7 times in this week's parasha. I had a bit of a difficulty locating the 7 parot, but it might include also where it says ota, it. But that's the drasha. And the drasha, his sermon is that there are 7 times things that come 7 times. This, of course, means, and as this is explained in one of the commentaries, that this 7 times 7 is 49. 49 in Kabbalistic lore, as in Midrashic lore, is considered the highest level that a human being can perceive in this world. It says that Moses was able to reach the rung of the 49th level because of his prophecy. But the 50th level is a level that in this world cannot be reached, because 7 is the number of nature. There's 7 colors in the rainbow, there's 7 continents, 7 seas, 7 days in a week, 7 numbers from A to G on the number scale, like on the piano, and 7 represents the natural world. So 7 times 7 is all the possibilities of this world. So Moses was the highest rung of prophecy, and he was called the 49th level. And that's the 7 times 7. So he was given the secret meaning of the red heifer. So according to Tanchuma, again, it's explaining it exactly the way I said. You have commandments which are self-evident and others which are not self-evident. But that means that a person is to try to understand them. It doesn't mean that they don't have any reasons. They do, but they're not obvious. They're not self-evident. Sometimes you have to experience them in order to understand what they mean. Remember, years ago, my father was involved in a project which was called Shabbatot Yachad, together with the late Professor Pinchas Pelli. Professor Pelli was very close with the Japanese group which was very friendly to Israel, and this group was called Makuya. and they used to send students to Israel to study Hebrew at the Hebrew University and other places. And one time they turned to him and said, look, we want to try to understand what the Sabbath is. Can you explain it to us? What is the Jewish Sabbath? He said, look, Sabbath is something you experience. I could talk about it, but until you've experienced it, it'll be hard to explain. So he said, look, we're doing this weekend retreat. Send some of your group and you'll be with the Sabbath with us, and maybe you'll start understanding what it's about. So they came, and they came on Friday, and they stayed till Saturday night. And after, Professor Pelly went over them and said, okay, now that you're here for the Sabbath, would you like to talk about it? They said, yes, but the truth is, we already are getting the idea of what it's all about. Because a lot of things in the mitzvot, especially the ones which are the chukim, have a certain existential part to them, because it's something that you're doing. Sometimes when you go through the motions, like Passover, like the Seder, like the eating of the matzah, like in Sukkot and the four species and building the booth, there's something about it which gives you a certain feeling. And then when you try to understand the symbolisms of the things, it starts getting more meaning into it. So, whereas this parasha starts with the ultimate paradox, which is the parah adamah, the red heifer, the symbol of the chukim, the non-self-evident, which are sometimes very hard to understand. But there are two parts. There's the part of the mitzvot where it's self-evident, and the ones which are less self-evident. Rabbi Kook refers this in one place to two levels, which he calls musar hateva and musar hakodesh, which means natural morality and sanctified morality. The self-evident mitzvot are natural morality, which most people understand or could understand, not to murder, not to steal, not to commit adultery, etc. But the chukim, which are not self-evident, have to do with sanctified morality, the morality of the holy, and therefore you understand it through intuition. They're not self-evident, and you have to look for reasons what they might be. There's actually quite an extensive Jewish literature trying to understand the mitzvot, particularly the mitzvot which are not self-evident. There's a lot of literature like that. Before I continue, I want to say that in my humble opinion, the reason why Parshat Hukat is right after Parshat Korach, even though there seems to be a vast time difference between them, because Parshat Korach is happening at the beginning, I think it's the second year, while the Jews are the Jews entered the desert from Egypt. Parshat Hukat is already in the 38th year, approximately, when the Jews are getting very close to coming to the land of Israel. And in this week's Parsha also, Moses is told, because he hit the rock and didn't speak to it, he's not going to be able to go into the land, neither Aaron, Aaron, his brother. And somebody else will take the Jews into the land of Israel, the Israelites. In my opinion, there's something about Hukat, which is an answer to Korach. As I mentioned last week, because Korach, according to, again, the Mishnah's Tanchuma, and tonight I'm following the Tanchuma, he says to Moses, according to the Tanchuma, Moses, you made up these laws and I'll prove it. Remember, he challenges the leadership of Moses, says to Moses, why are you elevating yourself above everybody else? Madua titnasu al kal Hashem. It's funny, the man that the Bible says is the most humble man on earth, he is accused of arrogance and elevating himself over everybody else by Korach. You can accuse somebody of anything, and that's very often what happens in politics. So, according to the Midrash, he said to Moses, if I had a house that was full of the books of the Torah, full of Sifrei Torah, the scrolls of the Torah, and every room, let's say I had a room that was full of Sifrei Torah, the books of the Torah, would I still need a mezuzah on the doorpost? Because after all, the mezuzah contains 2 paragraphs from the book of Devarim, or Deuteronomy. So why would I need that if I have the whole scroll of the Torah and the whole room is full of it? Moses says, of course you do. He says, you see, that's illogical, you're lying. Then he brought another example. The second example was, let's say I have a talit, a garment, which is made out of the blue threads. What's called the tchelet, the special blue dye. And the whole garment is made out of that. When I put the tzitzit, the fringes on it, on this four-cornered garment, do I still have to put the blue thread that the Torah prescribes in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bamidbar, chapter 16? It says yes. It says, you see, that's illogical. The whole thing has the blue threads. Add another one. Doesn't make sense. You made it all up. So Korach tries to use human logic to explain that the chukim, tzitzit is a chuk, mezuzah is a chuk, that the chukim are illogical. But the question is the way you approach chukim through logic? So the Torah right away starts, Parshat Hukat, with the ultimate chuk, the paraduma, the hardest nut to crack in understanding the chukim, the ultimate chuk. Where, as I said, King Solomon said that every other one I understood and I found reasons for, except for the red heifer, the paraduma. So then how do you understand? Well, let's think for a moment. When a person is keeping the mitzvot of the Torah, the mishpatim, the self-evident mitzvot, a person's keeping for double reasons. Number one, the Torah commands them to do it, but also they understand that it's the right thing to do. It's morality. Not to steal, not to murder, not to take advantage, not to cheat, not to lie, not to put a stumbling block before the blind. All these things make sense. In fact, some people do it just because they're good people. So you would have two reasons. Number one, the God commandment, and you say, yes, God commanded us to be good people, to be moral people. But to keep the mitzvot, which are the chukim, it takes time to understand them. And the Jewish people said, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will hear, meaning then we will understand. Because you can't understand the chukim just like that. And therefore, it's an act of faith. It's faith in the giver of the Torah, God, that his commandments are good. And we'll try to figure it out. We'll try to get that meaning. But in the meantime, we will keep it. Na'aseh v'nishma, because we have faith in the giver of the Torah. So this is an expression of faith. And as we do it, we try to understand it, not just with logic, with symbolism, with intuition, with experience. And these are the type of things that help us understand the chukim. Last week, in Parshat in Parshat Korach, I talked about this idea of faith. And I give an example of the story with the soldier next to Gaza. I wanted to give another example. And one is when Joseph met Paro. So when Joseph met Paro, and Paro had this dream, 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. So the question was, why did Paro think that Joseph's interpretation of the 7 years of plenty and famine were correct? Because there were many people offered interpretations. What made Joseph's interpretation more convincing? The Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, says that Nikarim divrei emet. It's obvious when somebody's telling the truth. You can almost feel it. It just fits right in. Nikarim divrei emet. There's certain things we pick up in our intuition. We sort of pick up in our intuition. And I'll mention one other thing. I have a friend, lives in Ramat Gan. His name is Michael Smas. He's a Shoah survivor. And he's probably the last survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. You can listen to him on my YouTube channel here in interviews. And I remember one time somebody asked him after he gave a talk, said, Michael, so many people lost their faith after the Shoah, after the difficult experiences they went through. Are you in that category? Michael said, no, I'm not in that category, but I understand them 100%. I understand why they lost their faith. The reason why I'm not in the category, he said, is because I faced death more than 10 times during those times. And I shouldn't have been here. And I have no idea how I was able to get through those situations. I felt like I was being watched the whole time, that I was being protected because none of it made any sense. And therefore, how can I not have faith through such an experience? But I definitely understand those who lost their faith too. But in my bones, I know that I was being protected. And that's why I tell my story all the time. So there's certain things you just feel or you know intuitively. But really, the goal of the chukim is to move from that point of emunah, of faith, to try to understand them, what they mean to life, what they add. And as I said, much literature has been written about this too. Shalom, shalom, and peace on Israel. Erev Tov.